This video is going to give you about 8 tips on how to do Stygian better. Obviously this is assuming you've already beaten the game once and you have a general idea for the game. Now if you beat the game on Radiant, I would maybe recommend you try Darkest first. If you don't have a lot of time, go for it and go with this anyways. However, I believe Darkest is much more like Stygian than Radiant is. Also, if you have a heavy use on mods or Reliant, whatever, this might be changing things, might make it more difficult. I don't know which mods you have, but I'm playing this without DLCs on. It is the base game Stygian. And one of my tips is going to be about the Crimson Court, so we'll get into that very shortly here. Timestamps are in the description and in my comment below. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to get to you. Tip 1. Do not put on the Crimson Court. If this is your first time through on Stygian, I probably wouldn't do the Crimson Court. It's going to affect your stress behaviors and all that stuff, and if you do it by once accidentally, you're really going to put on some heavy pressure for those 86 weeks you get. Therefore, I'd probably recommend trying the first time through without the Crimson Court on. If you found that to be too easy, or if you want to actually do it, go put it back on. You can always add it. I just don't know if I would have it on right away and then be like, ooh, this was a mistake about 40 weeks in. That's a lot of personal time invested, and if you end up not liking it, it's much harder to retract than it is to obviously just add later on. Also, after you beat the game, you can then flick on the Crimson Court, which means you would have gone through all the darkest dungeons. Therefore, you should have apprentice level people coming back up, and you should be able to do Crimson Court on the Stygian, which is going to have obviously the more HP and the resources and all that. So you can still play it, but without all the extra pressure of finishing in 86 weeks and worrying about all those extra deaths as well. So if you want to do it, just consider doing it after you technically beat the mode, so then you can play on the mode with a little bit of stress removed from you. Tip 2. Know your final 4 party compositions. This is honestly probably one of the biggest ones, and maybe if you play through you're not exactly thinking of initially. If you get through the run of the other one, you kind of have like a full roster of 32 people, or 30ish people, however many you have. And you've really sat there, you've gotten them their negative quirks off, you've gotten the best trinkets in the game, you're on week 120 or something, who knows. You're not going to have that luxury in Stygian. You're going to need a plan literally in the first 10 to 12 weeks. These are the final 16 people, at minimal, I'm going to take in. I believe for most of this campaign I had 20 to 21, I think 21 people. Had about 5 extras, and that was just to cycle through some bosses and some extra dungeons. But from the get-go, before I really even started this campaign, I said, what 16 heroes do I absolutely need, and what are they going to look like in the first, second, third, and final level of the Darkest Dungeon? I will admit, I made a small amount of adjustments as I went along. Some people I thought I was going to take in that dungeon, I actually moved up. But the point was, I never really added anyone or took away anyone from that 16. I just kind of shuffled around. And that helped me greatly, which means I found my people quicker, I could target my negative quirks faster, and also it allowed me not to have a huge roster size because I immediately knew what I wanted. Tip 3. Medium explore dungeons are the best. I was going to make a separate tip for scouting, but I'm going to kind of lump these two together. Medium dungeons are going to fill a lot of necessities. They're going to fill your gold necessity, they're going to fill your trinket necessity, they're going to fill your heirloom necessity, and most importantly, your quick resolve necessity. Now, I would avoid battle rooms, because battle rooms, I have a video on that, actually take a lot longer on medium. You take a lot more fights, which is, trust me, something you do not want to do in Stygian. The fights are significantly harder, you get more stress because enemies live longer. It's just all around bad to take more fights. Also, due to the shortened amount of weeks, you need to pretty much do medium dungeons at a minimal to get that resolve up as well. But the great thing about mediums is that's when you can start finding secret rooms. If you can get about 60 to 70% scouting, you can really start finding secret rooms, and that is an instant 10,500 gold, or that dungeon does not take up a lot of slots, so therefore you can also get the heirlooms you need to upgrade the buildings you want. Tip 4. Bosses are good, but not required. There's nothing in Stygian or the final Darkest Dungeon that says you must kill the bosses in the normal areas. Therefore, don't feel bad if you're leaving an apprentice level boss behind or a veteran. It's probably going to happen, because it's very difficult to kill all the bosses in 86 weeks and then obviously still do the final level of the Darkest Dungeon. And if you are doing that, now you can make that a challenge for yourself, but I'm just saying, if you are going to do that and you lose someone at week 70, you lose like 2 people to a boss, that could almost derail your campaign depending on who you lost at what point. And I will actually get to a quick example in tip 7 about that. Times where you may want to actually kill a boss is when they have just an absolutely great trinket. That's when you maybe want to do it, because really good trinkets, class specific trinkets, whoever you have you're going to use and you find the trinket you think they need, absolutely. Books of Sanity are amazing, focus rings are amazing, so stuff like that is an absolute must, I think. So if you find one with that, go and get it. But other than that, bosses are really just a higher chance to die depending on the boss you're walking into. Tip 5. Prioritize your heirlooms to deeds and portraits. Busts are going to be important, but they should really take almost 4th priority. I'm going to get to this later, but stress management has to happen in the dungeon, not really outside. It's going to become too expensive and too heirloom dependent for you really to build up good stress facilities and the money to also pay for that. Because the instance you don't find a couple of secret rooms in a row, you're going to be hurting for money very badly. And the reason why deeds and portraits are so important is because obviously that is your stagecoach, your armor, and your skills. These are obviously 3 things you can absolutely not live without. The skills are obviously going to help you survive via better accuracy, stun chances, all that stuff. You know what comes with it. And then obviously the better armor and weapons are going to help your speed, dodge, and HP, which is obviously vital to you living. You need to look this up. Deeds and portraits actually do have dungeon specific areas where they will spawn more. Look that up, and also obviously look up dungeons that are just willing to give you them for completing the dungeon. The reason why that's really important is you don't need to have actual item slots to get those deeds at the end. So if you can get 8 deeds here, 6 deeds there, maybe 12 or 15 for a long dungeon or something like that, I would recommend doing it, because once again, you can save that for money or more deeds, who knows. You can really double stack up and progress a lot quicker. So look for specific quests where dungeons are going to give you those items. Portraits are a big one because you can only stack 3, so if you can get 6 to 9 or even 12 for a dungeon, do that. Those other 3 to 4 item slots can be money, provisions, whatever have you. That can really help in the end, so you're going to have to prioritize which dungeons you're going into because you're going to need those items quickly, and a lot of them. Tip 6. Stress management is vital. If you weren't very good at managing stress in Radiant or Darkest, this is going to be super difficult, because that probably means you weren't able to really focus stress damage dealers or know how to recover your stress well, and it's only going to get worse in Stygian because those stress damage dealers are probably going to live almost an extra turn. We can literally start talking about 10 to 20 stress per fight, and imagine if you take 2 to 3 more fights, yeah, you're adding 50 extra stress, maybe at a minimal. You might get critically struck more now because enemy damage dealers are also living longer. There's a lot of weird sources where stress just seeps in more naturally in Stygian, and if you aren't handling the normal levels of stress well already, you're going to absolutely get wrecked. And that's probably going to, what happens to you is you're actually probably not going to lose a lot of heroes. Losing heroes is going to happen. I lost technically 5. I can talk about that in the video. Stress management is going to derail you in terms of money or heroes sitting out, and you really want all of your heroes available or not sitting in stress facilities multiple weeks at a time, paying vastly too much for them, recover their stress HP, and then obviously using building upgrades to actually make it worth it. So knowing how to manage your stress in the dungeon is very important. You're going to have to get creative via if it's a Houndmaster, a Crusader, obviously a Jester is the main one, but you probably aren't going to be able to have like 3 Jesters on board, 2 Houndmasters. I mean, you're going to have a big roster size for that, which is going to take up more deeds, and it's going to take up more time to obviously get them to a higher resolve. So if you're going to stick around 21 and 25 people, you're going to have a very few amount of stress healers. Like I had 1 Jester and I think a Houndmaster, but I always managed to have my stress be fairly low. Campfires, and that's another reason why actually medium dungeons are your best friend. They allow for stress heal at the end of the dungeon or mid-dungeon, so you should be able to walk out relatively low on stress each time, which allows you to keep pumping those heroes through dungeons very quickly. Tip 7. Avoid Shrieker and Wolf. The only time I wouldn't avoid the Shrieker is if they absolutely steal one of your most important items. And the reason why you need to avoid the Shrieker is you probably won't be able to kill it quickly or at all. And if you can't do that, it's going to be a lot of unnecessary stress, possibly unnecessary diseases and negative quirks. You can obviously kill the nest and get a decent amount of money, but it is I think it's a weak loss. I'd have to double check. But it might be a weak loss. You're going to get severely stressed. It's just going to be very costly for nothing. So if it's just to claim a Shrieker's trinket, leave it alone, not worth it. If you had a situation like I did where Wolf strolls into town, when I say to avoid Wolf, I don't mean just not do it. So it might sound a little conflicting. What I mean is send in one person, sacrifice them, get them killed. Don't lose your building upgrades. You will not have enough time. Take a hit. If you can't take a hit in the death category, if you've been doing bad, you're going to have to do it. Or just let your buildings burn down if you're already maxed out, everyone. I was at that consideration where I was like, well, everyone's maxed. But I had to have a contingency plan, because if a dungeon went wrong and I lost a building upgrade and let's say my armor and my max skills, I can really no longer function the Darkest Dungeon, so I had to keep my buildings intact. And I took in 4 people just for fun, and I lost 2 of them in there. If you have to do it, send in one person, let them die. If you want to do it and you're feeling confident, go ahead. But overall, I wouldn't really take that fight head on. There's a high potential to lose 2 to 3 people in there, and obviously with a death count of only 12 for the whole run, allowing pretty much 10 outside the Darkest Dungeon final level unless you do it with like 3 people or 2. And trust me, I wouldn't want to take 2 people into the final level. It's not the hardest, but why make it harder on yourself when you can severely reduce deaths and have good party composition going in. Tip 8, just the right amount of provisions. This was probably one of my weakest things, but really you need to look at the dungeon, you need to look at the enemies and say, what are they going to do? Such as in the ruins. You don't really need bandages, there's not really anyone going to bleed you. You might run into cultist brawlers and all that, but for the most part you don't need bandages, so don't buy like 3 bandages out habit like I was doing. Very bad. I always tend to go much more excessive on the food and torches. Food and torches are absolutely needed. I'd rather have too much at the end than too little. They do add up, however, it's the other expensive ones, such as if you bought too many shovels, if you for some reason brought along blight cures when you're not going to use blight cures, like 6 holy waters compared to maybe only needing 3, 5 medicinal herbs to needing 2, such as medicinal herbs in the ruins once again, not always the biggest thing, so maybe bring in 1 or 2 but not 4, and after a while that extra 500 to maybe even 1,000 gold you save per dungeon is really going to add up. So let's say you can save 500 gold per dungeon, right? You get to 40 weeks, that is 20,000 gold. That's right, 20,000 gold just because you brought along less provisions. Very important, something to get good at, and it was something I slowly got better as I did. But in the beginning, I was definitely overpaying, and it didn't destroy my economy, but it would have been nice to have some of that extra gold because I wasn't just overbuying. So learn what each dungeon does, learn what each person brings along, hero-wise, and you can start reducing that price, which will help out your overall gold as well. Overall, the hardest thing in Stygian is probably not the 86 weeks. I finished it in 58. You can actually get very high leveled and enough heirlooms quickly. The problem is you start running yourself rather thin and you have the same amount of people. If you lose a person or 2, that's where it tends to derail you, such as you get like week 55, you have your compositions, and then the 1 person you need for a level the Darkest Dungeon dies. Well, there's really no good way to bring someone up, because if you have Resolve 6s and you need to bring up Resolve 2 and you no longer have any Resolve 2s around, how the heck are you going to bring up that Resolve 2 without them possibly getting absolutely murdered in a dungeon or spending multiple weeks in stress facilities, negative quirk facilities, you know what I mean? So losing someone in the late game is actually where Stygian pretty much screws you, because at that point you're out of time, you probably don't have the available people to help get them up. So that's probably the hardest thing. When you get to the final levels, that's why I'm not a huge fan of taking the final level bosses in each area. Something stupid happens, you lose a person, and now you just derailed the last 55 weeks you did. I would highly recommend not doing that. And once again, a thing that really helped me was just know your last 4 party compositions. Those 14 to 16 people. If you're an absolute diehard, you want to go in with only 2 people in the final level, go for it. I wouldn't recommend it. Just take the 16 in, try to reduce your campaign deaths to 9, because I think it ends right at 12. I don't think you get 13, so you can realistically only lose 9 and then plus 2 at the end. Obviously, if you can negate that if you bring only 3 or 2 in to the final level, but why not bring all 4, try to keep those deaths down, as I said before. You're going to find out real quick if your party compositions aren't very good. You're also going to figure out if you've been managing stress really well as well. If you're figuring out you can't do that well enough and the compression of weeks and money and time and deaths is just too much for you, go back to even, a campaign you finished and just keep doing some champion level dungeons over and over and over again until you can like walk out with 10 to 15 less stress on everybody. And that might sound crazy to some of you, and some of you might be like, well, yeah, you never want to leave with like above 20 stress. But some of us, when we first started playing, you might leave a dungeon with like 40 stress on a couple of people. And you're like, oh, that's not bad. We'll throw them to 3 stress facilities, wait for them next week. You're really not going to be able to do that effectively in Stygian, so learn how to manage stress well, learn how to take opportunities to stun people, heal up your stress on all that. The reason why I didn't go too in depth on that in this video, because that's something you're just going to have to know. I do have other tips out there on how to help that a little bit, or you can actually watch my playthrough and see how I do it as well. Managing stress is very difficult to explain because there's so many ways to do it that's hard to put in a video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope these help you get an idea of how to initially do this. If you're looking for building paths and all that, you can watch my playthrough, or that's also something you can pretty much plan because you know you're going to need the guild, the blacksmith, and the stagecoach upgraded. Based on those three, you should probably play around with them, and you should probably progress together rather than just completing one and then completing the other. Obviously, as you gain resolve, just add the resolves you need for that level. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe below.